And now back to Bobby Likis Car Clinic and your host, Bobby Likis.
Chris with a 2002 Lincoln Town Car. Welcome to Bobby Likis Car Clinic.
Thank you, Bobby. What I'm having a little difficulty with is sometimes I come out in the morning and I try to start the car and it'll keep starting, just start. It'll kick over. It won't actually start. And then I'll turn the key completely off and turn it back up and starts right up. And I'll go through maybe 3 or 4 more stops during the day, starts fine, and then all of a sudden, maybe in the afternoon, maybe 3 o'clock, get out, go to start it, same thing. You turn it off, turn it right back on, it'll start right up. So it's an intermittent problem.
Yeah.
When it starts, after it starts, runs fine, never have a problem. After that, it's just that intermittent. Sometimes you come out, my wife's even gotten into it, and she'll call me and she'll say, hey, it's not starting. I'll say, well, cut it off.
Right.
And then she'll turn it and she'll say, oh, okay, now it's right. Now it's fine.
Well, one thing that I do know, when you turn the key off, and this is something that I want you to try. Well, you've already tried it and it works, but it doesn't mean that it leads me to believe that the fuel pump or the relay in the vehicle that sends power to the fuel pump is not working. And I think fuel pump, and I'll tell you why. Fuel pumps, when they, a body at rest tends to stay at rest. The rule. So a fuel pump has to move from a dead stop and then pump immediate pressure. And what I sincerely believe, and I have seen this, in fact, I just mentioned Terry Elm. I actually looked at a fuel pump recently, a complete assembly that he had pulled out of an automobile. And I said, how did you find this problem? And he said, well, I used a lab scope to find it, and it was erratic. It was similar to yours. I'm not sure what car it came out of, but they're almost all the same with regard to fuel pumps in tanks these days. And what he found was on the commutator, which is the little electric motor. That's how electric motors work. There's a force field that pulls the armature and turns the armature, and then as it's pulled toward its next little field, when it goes past, the field in front of it pulls it, and that's how it works. So it's always reaching toward the next little field. And when I come back from this break, I'll pick up where I left off and explain to you. But I seriously think that you've got a fuel pump problem. In the meantime, stay tight. And folks, you stay tuned. I'll be back. I'm talking with Chris, who has a 2002 Town Car that has an erratic behavior with regard to lighting off. It always cranks fine, but it doesn't want to start. So, Chris, you mentioned, and it worked for you, and it worked for your wife, which is more important when she called you and needs your help, man, on the side of the road, just to recycle the key, and it worked. So here's what happens when you do that. When you turn the key on, first turn the key on any automobile, and before you go to the crank mode. In an electronic fuel-injected car, it's manufactured so that the fuel pump will, about 3/4 of a second, it will run so that it primes the fuel system, because the fuel system must have existing pressure, or it will not deliver fuel for the first 2 or 3 revolutions of the engine. During you got to have fuel. And that's analogous to, if you'll just think, Chris, about when you turn your water sprinkler system on and you have the sprinkler heads coming up out of the yard. If you've got, say, 5 heads on one segment, the heads will pop up, and then they'll spit a little water, and then another one pops up, and finally they all flush the air out, and then they cover the grass. Well, if your injectors were to drain down, or your pressure were lost in any electronic fuel injected car during the time that those sprinklers, which are fuel injectors, same thing, literally, with electronic controls, if those injectors didn't have a pressured fuel with no air, then that cylinder that was being sprayed would not get fuel. And not to get technical, but I think this is very interesting. Blink your eye. Everybody, blink your eye. When you blink your eye, that's 0.2 of a second or 200 milliseconds. An injector opens 3 milliseconds. It's amazing. Wow. It's amazing. And furthermore, when you take gas mileage and you look at your little trip set, your instant readout of gas mileage, there is no gas mileage meter on the car. What happens is every 0.6 of a mile, the computer counts how many milliseconds the injector was open. Let's say it opened in 0.6 of a mile, it opened 138,240 times at 3 milliseconds, but you stepped on the gas, which causes it to enrichen, and it's open for 5 milliseconds. Or you crank the car up cold, it's open for 9 milliseconds. So the computer says, well, I had 40,000 9 millisecond openings. I had 138,216 3 millisecond openings, and I've got X amount of pressure, and I'm pushing that much fluid through a 40,000 orifice. That equals X gallons. It's like when you turn your faucet on in your house and you've got 30 pounds of pressure, and it can fill a 5-gallon bucket in, say, 1 minute, or 2 minutes, or a gallon a minute, whatever it is. So that's how MPG gauges work in cars. It's fascinating, quite honestly.
Awesome.
Yeah, it is.
I tell you, the great thing about being able to call you, Bobby, is that you explain it. Now, when I go to my shop, and I can narrow it down and say I'm having this problem, and I say something like I think it's going to be this, and a lot of times they'll go, "Hey, you must be psychic." I'm just thinking that what it might be. I try to help you out.
Yeah.
But 9 times out of 10, you are right on the money.
Well, for the experience that we have, and I've been in the business a long time, we've had more than 200,000 cars and small trucks through our doors in our 43 years. And so I would have had to, just by osmosis, I would have had to have learned something. Not that we haven't made our share of mistakes in my racing days. Sure. I've made a bunch of them. But getting back to your Lincoln, here's what I'd like for you to do. I'd like for you to have the fuel filter changed, and then have them to take a blood sample or a fuel sample out of the old filter to take a look to see if there's any metal flakes. There's going to be some dark-looking carbon. That's normal. And a little debris, that's normal. That's what the filter is there for. And don't do this yourself. This is a shop to do. And that way you don't go in and say, what you don't want to do is say, well, I listened to Bobby Likis, and he said put a new fuel pump, and they got to drop the tank, put a new fuel pump, and that still has the same problem. So we don't want to do that. But by the same token, I just want you to know that every time you cycle the key from off to run, it sends a full 12-volt reference signal to the fuel pump for 3/4 of a second. And if you have good ears, which I don't, you can hear the pump go, if you're careful. In fact, just as an FYI, in years past, Lincoln issued a technical service bulletin because it seems the rear seat passengers in town cars, as the car was driving down the road, could hear the buzzing of the fuel pump in the tank. And here's what Ford Motor Company did, Chris. You'll get a kick out of this. It wasn't a recall. It was a technical service bulletin, which means only for those people who complain is a dealer going to be paid to fix the problem. So, it's kind of a hidden recall. And so here's what they did. They being the dealers, at no charge, they dropped the fuel tank. They installed additional insulation between the fuel tank and the floorboard of the car to further silence the tank. That's fact. And then they put it back up, and so then that little noise was like you couldn't quite hear it. So anyway, it solved the complaint, and and these are probably, gosh, I get shot for saying this. These are probably old people riding in the back of Lincolns that said, "What's that noise back there?" And the driver up front, who's almost as old, says, "I don't hear any noise."
I don't hear.
Hey,
good.
I got another call.
That's your imagination. I know.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Hey, thanks for your call and just share that information. And I love it. I love it. I call it buzzwords and empowerment when I give my Car Clinic listeners, and that would be you, sir, and your kind words are appreciated, information. And you go to a service shop, and I love it when women go in and say, my car is not running correctly. It sort of hesitates. Can you run a fuel pressure test? And and also check for residual fuel pressure. What? Residual fuel pressure? What the hell is that? So anyway, those are the kind of things that would get you better connected to your service shop. That's my job, and that's what it's all about. Hey, thanks for your call. Appreciate your kind words.
Thank you, Bobby.
Yeah.
You take care.
Okay,
God bless you.